Hello, welcome to my page. Uh, Reading another chapter out of one of my books, Dad's Old Truck, Volume 2. This will be Chapter 5. If you're new to my channel, I'm reading every chapter of every book I've ever written. I've got 14 books. There'll only be 12 books that I read because two of the books are made up of a compilation of like Dad's Old Truck 1 and 2, and the other one is Love Endures All Things 1, 2, and 3. So there'll only be 12 books I read. I hope to get it all done by the end of the first year. So, provided I haven't written any more books, I hope to be able to get every book up on YouTube by then. Uh, if you enjoy what I do and you're in a hurry to hear each story, you can go to my webpage, which is curtis-jones-books.squarespace.com, and there's links to take you to all my books there. But it describes each book in some detail there, so that you know what to expect out of each book. Or you can go to my Facebook page, which is Curtis Jones Author page on Facebook. It also has links to my uh, Amazon site where they sell my books, but it also has a seminar that I put on before COVID came, teaching people how to write their own books and publish their own books. And you might enjoy that off of the Facebook site. So let's get started with the next chapter, chapter 5. It's entitled Back Home. We went to Oklahoma after the rice was past. Dad's skin was eaten up from all the rice hulls. It took some time for him to recover from the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, which was California, when we left Oklahoma. I remember we were all so happy to be going back home. Home to the kids was Tahlequah, but that was not where we went. We went to Stillwell, Oklahoma. Aunt Helen and Uncle John lived at the base of Workman Mountain. That was a prominent place in our family history. Workman Mountain was. When we came to Oklahoma, Dad drove his pickup and pulled the trailer carrying almost all of our belongings. Mom drove a 1950 Ford station wagon, what they call a Woody today. They became popular some years later. My little brother was the youngest of us. He was little more than a baby when we went back to Oklahoma. I thought we looked like a caravan as we headed off. It was about the middle of September. It doesn't rain in California this time of year, so Dad thought we'd be okay without a tarp over the load. Mom and Dad had loaded so that we all had places to sleep on top of the truck and on top of the trailer. At that time, there were no cheap tarps that were light and easy to handle like we have today. So we left with high hopes from California. We were just 200 miles down the road when the first problem struck. The wheel bearing went out on the trailer. We spent several hours alongside of the highway called Highway 99 in Central California while Dad made repairs. We spent the first night in Mojave Desert. You may not believe it, but a desert is a very cold place at night. We got an early start. By the time we reached Barstow, it was looking like a flash flood was coming our way. In Barstow, Dad pulled under a truck stop canopy to fill the gas tank and to buy a tarp to protect our stuff. He stayed there to put on the tarp because it was raining hard by then. He did this for both the trailer and the truck as we stayed under the canopy at the station. They threatened to call the police if we did not move out from under it. With us parked there, it blocked their drive and kept the rain off of our load. The tarps were very expensive. The owner finally came down and allowed us to tie down under the canopy. When we headed out, were following Route 66. We had gone only 30, 40, maybe 50 miles when the cloudburst loosened and all of their loosened with all of their force. We were near a small town called Ludlow, California. Route 66 was a two-lane road with traffic in both directions at that time. It was mostly very narrow and had many curves, even through the desert. There were areas in the desert where the road was absolutely straight for maybe 10 miles. As we went through Ludlow, it was nearly 6 o'clock and it was getting dark. As we drove up the other side of the valley, it became very dark indeed. In my whole life, I had never seen rain like that night. Was very heavy. We were in the middle of a flash flood. I never saw rain like that again until I came to Alabama. It rains like that in the South all the time. We sat on the side of the road because the rain was so heavy we could not see the road. When we finally got started, Dad was leading the caravan and he wanted to make up some time. He passed several cars going up a hill. Mom struggled to keep up with the old Ford. She passed every car Dad passed. By now, it was completely dark. Everyone had their headlights on. Mom was tired and frustrated with trying to keep up with Dad. He would fuss at Mom if she did not keep up. Just a second, let me set this up so I can't hear it. There we go. Uh, and she did not keep up. When we started down the other side of the hill, Dad passed the car and Mom passed right behind him. We were moving pretty fast by now. Dad was maybe a quarter mile ahead of Mom. A car was coming up our way with his bright lights on. Mom flashed her lights, bright and dim, many times. The car coming toward us never dimmed his lights. Mom was very angry by this time. She pulled into the lane of the oncoming car and brightened her lights one last time. She remained in his lane with bright lights until we were very close to each other. The car with the bright lights turned to the right, driving on the shoulder as we passed each other. Looking back at the car through our back window, he continued to bear to the right and drove off into the desert. He was still driving into the desert when we went over the hill top. I don't know what happened to that driver, but Mom pulled back into her own lane. We never had another incident like that. We originally planned to keep or to sleep in national parks, but it turned out that we weren't near one when we stopped at night most of the time. We ended up sleeping in picnic areas outside the towns, because most towns on Route 66 had picnic areas just outside each end of the town. We spent that night in a wide pull off area among tall stacks of gravel used for road work. It didn't rain anymore that night, but we did get a late start the next morning. Nerves were beginning to wear thin on this trip. Nothing had seemed to go right. We finally passed through Essex, California, the last of the long valleys before we came to Needles, the last town in California. The trip went very quickly from there on. We soon arrived at Aunt Helen's house. They welcomed us and told us that we were free to stay as long as we needed to stay. The problem with staying with them was that parties, they partied to excess every weekend. Uncle John did, and Helen with him. By this, I mean to say, Aunt Helen and Uncle John would get very intoxicated on Friday night. Mom and Dad never drank. We were there for a couple of days when Friday rolled around. Uncle John brought home 2 cases of beer and a bottle of strong spirits. I don't know what it was. Neither Mom or Dad drank any alcohol as far as I knew. They never did. That meant this was a poorly thought out plan. Sometime after they drank and the drinking had started, an argument broke out over Aunt Helen playing a record album recorded by a well known black artist. Uncle John picked up the record player and threw it, along with the album, out the front door into the yard, breaking it into a million pieces. He told Aunt Helen that he did not want that played in his house. So the fight began to be, oh, I'm sorry. So the fight began to be an exchange of furious words and actions on both parties. It was the first domestic violence that we kids had ever seen, although our cousins had seen it before. They tried to console us. All of my sisters were huddled around Mom. Dad was talking to Uncle John, trying to calm the situation down. He would not hear what was said because he was so angry. They were both intoxicated, Uncle John and Aunt Helen. The fight lasted for a couple of hours before they were both calmed down. They had struck each other several times during the argument. Their children were trying to calm us down the whole time. They had endured this many times before. The kids were our best friends when we were young. They were the only playmates and fellow adventurers as we learned about the world. We missed them terribly when we were in California. We were so happy to see them when we returned. The argument had happened. Uh, the argument that happened could well have been our fault for having moved into their house. This caused stress for Uncle John and Aunt Helen. We will never know what brought on the argument that fateful night. Mom ordered Dad to find us a place to live so that her kids would not have to experience this again. Dad met a man named Mr. Workman. He was the descendant of the people that first established homes on Workman Mountain. He lived on top of that mountain, that very hill. His wife's name was Sarah. They owned many acres on top of the hill. The original house that his grandparents built in the late 1800s was still standing. It was a log cabin. Part of the material that is pressed between each log had fallen out. There were holes between the logs in several places. That material is called chinking. Because of the domestic violence that happened at our cousin's house, Mom settled for this old house as an improvement over our living conditions. Everything was still packed in the trailer, so Dad simply hooked onto it and pulled it up to the old log house. When Dad pulled his truck and trailer uh, up to the old house, it was the first we children or Mom had seen of the place. So let me try to describe what my little eyes beheld on that clear, crisp fall morning. The house itself looked like an old barn that had been abandoned for many decades. The roof of the house was made of shakes, that is, wooden shingles that were handmade. There stood a wire fence designed to keep pigs in a pen that surrounded this old house. There was a gate in front of the old house wide enough for Dad to back the trailer to the front porch. As we entered the front yard, weeds were taller than we children. We walked alongside the pickup and trailer in order to find our way to the house. There was a front porch that went to the full length of the front of the house with a widely spaced wood floor. When you looked down at the floor, you could see cracks above about an inch wide so that you could see the ground beneath the house. All of the wood on the house and the porch looked like a dusty gray that wood looked like after that's what wood looks like after exposure to weather for many decades. Page turn. The floor itself was fairly solid inside the house. We began to carry all of our furniture into the house. The first room of the house was the main living area. It had a very old fireplace that was probably there when the house was built. The first room was about 12 foot by 24 foot with two doors going off the other half of the house. There was one opening at the back of the living room that opened into the kitchen. There were two rooms at the other side of the main house. There was an add-on that went the length of the back of the house, which contained the kitchen. Kitchen had an old wood cook stove. Mom knew how to use one of those for cooking. Dad had rented this old house for only $5 a month. I remember hearing Mom say that first day that Dad was robbed when he paid rent on this house. We began by moving all of our things into the old house. It took most of that first day to get everything inside. Mom spent a lot of time cleaning, Betty helping her. This is how we spent our first Saturday back in Oklahoma. It was late September by this time. School had already started, and cool weather was beginning to set in the evening. While Betty and Mom worked on the inside of the house, Dad chopped wood for the fireplace and the cook stove. Most of the rest of us who were big enough chopped weeds out of the yard so that we could see snakes. should they come around the house. Mom was always afraid of spiders and snakes and scorpions around the house. And there were many of those kinds of things we saw. We saw them often over that first month. Mr. Workman told Dad no one had lived in that house for over 35 years. When we left California, we packed everything that we owned into the back of Dad's old truck and into that trailer. They left Mom's cook stove and refrigerator in the trailer when we set up housekeeping in that old log dwelling. When evening came, Dad would build a big rolling fire in the fireplace, and it would heat maybe half of that first room. The rest of the house was as cold as though you had not built a fire at all. Even we children could see how miserable our mother was. We kids wished that uh, there were there was some way we could help her feel better about where we lived. We agreed that we would not fuss about our living condition for Mom's sake. Sarah Workman drove a 1951 Ford station wagon to work every day. She worked as the cook at the school where we all attended. Mrs. Sarah would pick us up as she drove to school. The four of us, along with her four children, rode to school every day. We called her her car Mrs. Sarah's school bus. She was really quite wonderful to start our school day. She cooked for the school and did some other chores as well. She would give us a ride home when school was out. We really enjoyed the time we spent with Mrs. Sarah. That place where we lived was a dream come true for a little boy. There were more places to explore than anywhere I'd ever lived. There were other people that lived with me in this house that were not happy. Within a few days, Mom had loaded most of the furniture back into the trailer. She was determined not to live at this place. Mom told Dad we would only keep out enough of their belongings to camp at the house. Mom demanded that Dad return us to California. Dad explained that he had spent most of the money that they had coming to Oklahoma. He said that was there was not enough to make the trip back to California. Mom asked Dad if she could get the money up to go to California, would he take everyone back? Dad said if Mom could get the money, we would go back to California. Mom called a dear friend in California that we had gone to church with. She asked them to send $100 so she could get back to California. The lady's name that sent Mom the money was Mrs. Cook, Koch. I remember her well. She ran a dairy. She sent the money the very next day. Mom went to Western Union and picked up the money. We were sent, or we were sent to go back. We were set to go back to California. I'm sorry. It is difficult to move to a place to live when all you have is money enough to make the trip. The, that creates a whole new adventure for a little boy. I could see the nervousness on Mom's and Dad's face, and we maybe, maybe Even my sister Betty seemed worried about what to do when we got to California. Thank you for coming along with me on this journey. I hope you enjoy the stories I tell about the life I lived. Uh, if you like it, hit the bell to subscribe, and then hit the bell so you can be notified each time I post a new video, a new chapter, and like it and share it so that your friends can see and hear these stories too. The world's changed so much from then till now that the things I had to deal with and we went through probably wouldn't happen today. I want to say God bless you and keep you safe, and we will